3 years ago, a flood wave destroyed 270 houses here in Duque de Caxias. 2 people were left dead and 60 injured. The scale of the disaster became apparent the day after. Looking at pictures from back then is still hard to bear for Regina Gonçalves. Her family managed to escape in time, but they've lost everything.
This used to be my house. The water gushed in here through the window. We heard this dull thud and immediately went to look. The flood wave had already washed away everything out front. We had no time at all. We just had to run.
The houses were built right next to the river, even though it often rains heavily here. The trained architect Marcio Vieira blames poor planning in the past. Vieira, who heads up the urban planning department, takes us to the center of Duque de Caxias. The city borders Rio de Janeiro. Almost 1 million people live here, many of them commuters. In the last few decades, the city has grown exponentially.
The lack of urban planning in the past meant that buildings in the city were constructed incredibly close together. No green spaces were left. Everything was built over.
The disaster that took place 3 years ago has led to a rethink. Vieira points out to us the coastal strip just beyond the city, which is lined with mangrove swamps. He tells us that this is the first time that people have recorded how nature benefits the city and its people. A study was funded by the German International Climate Protection Initiative.
Thanks to this research, it's now easier to explain why certain construction projects cannot be given planning permission. Ecosystems and natural habitats have to be given priority. Everyone in the municipal authority is playing their part. We now have an instrument to shape urban planning.
Development is now prohibited in the mangrove forests on the outskirts of Duque de Caxias. They're just a few kilometers from the city center and act as a flood barrier. Vieira shows us around this sensitive ecosystem.
Nature is really impressive, particularly here in the mangrove swamps. It's so powerful.
And this power becomes apparent on ebb tides, when the creatures living in the mud become more visible. The crabs provide a livelihood for hundreds of families here, but the fishermen tell us that their hauls are shrinking. Our guide tells us that not long ago he also used to catch oysters and salmon in these waters.
Look how dirty it is here, all this rubbish floating around. The mangroves are the only things helping to combat pollution for us fishermen. The trees filter toxins from the water and then die off. If it weren't for them, we'd really have a huge problem.
The increasing pollution is having a detrimental impact on the environment and biodiversity. It's a development that's also a cause of concern for city planner Marcio Vieira.
In the future, the city's existence will depend on the mangrove forests. We know that climate change is coming, and the mangroves are our bulwark against rising sea levels. Duque de Caxias is located in a hollow. Even now, there's a danger of flooding.
The second natural environment that the city planners now regard as sacred is situated to the north of the city, the Atlantic forest. More than 20,000 species of plants and more than 2,000 animal species live here. It's our next stop, and the director of the nature reserve, Gisela Medeiros, joins us on our trip. The Atlantic forest used to cover large swathes of Brazil. Only 7% of the original forest has survived.
People pose the biggest threat to the forest. We have to communicate better that the financial benefits of logging pale in comparison with those of having an intact forest.
mundo muito melhor.
This is where the city's drinking water comes from. The rainforest also helps cool the entire region. It also provides another valuable service that explains its status in Maceo Vieira's master plans.
When it rains hard, the rainforest retains a large volume of water and releases it into the city more gradually. It absorbs a lot of water and slows down the outflow. The rainforest has become a lifesaver for the city's inhabitants.
Without it, the flood wave would have been a lot more destructive 3 years ago. Increasingly, areas close to the river are being left undeveloped, so they can act as a floodplain.
We've moved on from the phase where we were concerned with building as much as possible without a second thought. Now, when we construct a building, we couple it with a green space. No one benefits if houses are squeezed in next to each other and people are piled on top of each other. The quality of life suffers and it can cause disasters like it did here. We want to create a city in which nature is a firm fixture.
Hopefully, the city of Duque de Caxias will respect its natural resources more in the future. It can only be in the best interests of the people living here.